Well, I'm delighted to speak with you all tonight because I love sharing this material because it's made such a difference in my life. It's helped me to be able to manage my reactive self and to find more lightness and brightness and pass that on. So the leadership embodiment model, as Miles said, has been informed by two wisdom traditions, primarily Aikido and mindfulness. And in leadership embodiment, we work with the body because it's a shortcut. And when I'm in organizations, people love to hear that. And we say it's a shortcut because our experience shows up in our body before it comes to our conscious awareness. And we say that because small children and animals know before we know when we're mad, sad, glad, or afraid. That means our experience shows up in our body, and we could have been stressed for 10 seconds, 2 minutes, or as one client said, 2 years before we realize that we're stressed. And the thing about when we are triggered is that we tend to tighten up, and when we tighten up, we release cortisol. And cortisol shuts down the part of the brain that governs big picture thinking, creativity, innovation, connection. So it's really fairly straightforward. If we change our muscle groups, we can actually change the chemicals that are being released in our body, which changes our brain. So that's why it's a shortcut. And instead of trying to sort ourselves out through our understanding, what we do in leadership embodiment is we actually change the muscle groups and we change the process that, the form that we're using in our body. So if we can fire extensor muscles, if we sit up, if we open up, if we extend out, a little testosterone gets released. And that activates the part of the brain that governs big picture thinking, creativity, innovation, and risk-taking. Testosterone on its own can be annoying because it can be a little pushy, as we know. So what we want to activate is oxytocin. Oxytocin, I call it the connector hormone. And we do that in this model by taking a few seconds to think of something that makes us smile. So if we all do that for a few seconds, just think of something that really makes you want to smile. I know what Miles is thinking about. his little ones. That warm feeling that you're getting is oxytocin. So the idea is that we want to balance a cocktail, a combination of testosterone and oxytocin, and we'd like to minimize the cortisol that is coming through our system. So in order to study ourselves further, what we're going to do in leadership embodiment, I'm going to make a distinction between two parts of ourselves. One part I call personality, and it's very similar to ego, only ego is a complex term. So personality is the part of us that references on trying to create security in our life. And in leadership embodiment, we say the strategies are control, approval, and at a core level, safety. I myself am a head type, and so I am big on control, but I don't want you to think I'm a control freak, but I need more control. If I'm in approval, I want you to like me, but not too much, because then that's too much, and like me a little bit more. So these strategies take a lot of energy to maintain at the proper level. And while we're trying to maintain security, we're not really free for creativity. We're not really free for possibility and living into our potential. The good news is we have a whole nother part of us that we refer to in this model as our centered self. In this model, center is not a place in your body, it's a state of being. And it's a state of being that most of us have touched into when we've experienced what's often called the zone or the flow state. That is when I'm doing an activity, I begin to fatigue, I back off a little bit, and suddenly it becomes effortless or easy. In the flow state, perhaps I'm working on writing a paper or something for my book. It might be people in organizations working on a project. They get stuck, they'll step away, have tea, get coffee, come back, it starts to flow. So our interest in facilitating people in this work is how do we give them the tools to move more quickly from our personality, which is our reactive self, to our centered self, which is our resourceful self. And we also don't use the term transformation in this model because our feeling is that we're actually going to always be triggered, personality will be activated, and then we can move to center. And so we use the infinity sign. there's a sense of pulsing between these parts of ourselves because we're both. As far as I'm concerned, I've never met anyone who stays centered. If anyone tells me they do, I'd like to spend a few minutes with them. I'm not buying it. It's all in the recovery. It's all in the connecting back. And also accepting our reactive self because it's our humanity. So moving further on, we work with 3 leadership competencies when we're teaching the coaching to people. The first one is inclusiveness. It's the message we're in this together. It's not just the rhetoric, it's the felt sense that we're in this together. We have some neuroscience to discuss what leadership presence is. The second leadership competency is centered listening, listening without taking criticism personally. And the last one is speaking up, advocating without being aggressive, really taking a stand for what we believe in, whether people agree with us or not. So in this little talk, I'm going to touch on the first 2, inclusiveness, and then we'll do a little exercise with centered listening as well. So the whole notion of inclusiveness is that neuroscience has coined this term called a peripersonal space. And what neuroscience says is that the brain maps everything within our reach as us. Depending on your culture, it's closer in or further away, but the brain thinks that this is me. My brain also maps my family as me. So I can talk to them halfway across the world and they're in my personal space. But if I go to the store, that person becomes other. If I go to a meeting, those people become other. I like them, I'm friendly with them, they're not in my personal space, they're not part of me. So it's my experience when I see the great leaders who've been able to make tremendous impact in the world. My belief is that their brain actually maps the team, their organization, or in extreme cases, their country as them. I'm in South Africa at this time, and Nelson Mandela is one of my heroes. And I believe that Nelson Mandela mapped his country as part of him. Even people who hated him were still part of him. And I think he was able to be a very strong influence because of that. I believe that Martin Luther King and Gandhi did the same. Even people who hated them, who wished them ill, they mapped them as part of them. So to do that, we have to practice expanding our personal space. Normally it's a bubble that's around us or it connects to our family. And we do that with our concentration. So as you sit right now, you can expand your personal space by looking at the corners of whatever room you're in or out the window if you're, and you actually imagine that you're pushing your bubble, which the personal space is like a bubble, out so that it touches those corners and touches the ceiling. And then for a moment, see if you can just concentrate on the space and connect to it. So the space is not empty. That's something very interesting for my experience on how I developed leadership embodiment, whether it's Aikido on the mat or in real life. Space is actually filled with flow, with life force, with energies, and I like to invite archetypes into the space. So the idea is in leadership embodiment, and the reason this talk is entitled Coaching from the Outside In, we don't actually initially go inside and try to sort ourselves out. It's my experience that inside me is Pandora's box. And although I have compassion and I have confidence and so on, I immediately connect to guilt and shame and resentment and a lot of things when I go inside. So we use the part of ourselves that lies outside of our skin to connect to, because our experience is that's, I'm going to use the word cleaner and more resilient. And what I do is I imbue that part of myself that's out here, because neuroscience has clarified that we don't end at our skin. We actually extend beyond that. We can feel each other across the room. Sometimes we can feel each other through the video in a conference like this. So what I do is I imbue the personal space with archetypes. And I'm going to talk about some of the well-known ones that I use. When I feel I need more wisdom, because my mind is getting tight, I invite the Dalai Lama. And when I invite the Dalai Lama, I suddenly, because I've been around him, I've had the great fortune, and I remember that feeling, and it changes my experience of myself. I'm a very reactive person. I have a lot of Irish in me. I'm very quick to have a hot temper. And so when I react, especially driving, because driving gets me, I invite Mother Teresa. And immediately I can go from, oh, you're an idiot, to, oh, be careful. Because if I think of Mother Teresa, her response would be careful to the driver, not you're an idiot. And when I need more confidence, I invite either O Sensei, the founder of Aikido, or Nelson Mandela. And when I think of either of them, I just feel a little bit more capacity to take action. So this is an invitation for those of you watching to consider who you might invite to connect to give you a little boost. And you can just do one archetype. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be something from nature. It could be, we have clients who use their animals. I have several clients, they're sort of Silicon Valley clients, very intense all the time, working, and they're very serious and they're very critical. But both these clients will say their dogs give them unconditional love. Whenever they come home, their dogs are always happy to see them. And when they think about their dogs, I watch their face lights up. And for a moment, they're not sort of burdened with that heavy cloud of criticism or feeling like they must do it. They lighten up. And when they lighten up, they have more access to creativity and possibility. So the whole idea of inclusiveness is we not only include others, we include them with qualities that allow them to feel more appreciated, more resourceful, more connected to. We cultivate our warmth. And so right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us through a little exercise, and then I'll have a Q&A. So you have a little idea of experiencing what I've been talking about. So what I'd like us all to do is close and cross and tighten up a little bit, maybe hunch over, and think of something that happened recently that was annoying, not horrible, or just frustrating. And we'll all go there for 8 seconds. That's just, for 8 seconds, just relive that unpleasant experience. Okay, everybody stop. I'm sure some of us got there in 2 seconds. I certainly did. I'm going to coach us into a different energetic state. So I'd like us to sit up a little straighter. You can push your hips back in the chair if that helps. And we're going to work with the breath as up and down instead of in and out. And what I'd like us to do is we inhale as lengthen your spine and think up out the top of your heads. And as you exhale, soften your chest, breathe down, and think of something that makes you smile. And then do it one more time. As you inhale, a dignified, uplifted posture. As you exhale, softening your chest, thinking of something that makes you smile. Nice. Now with your eyes, see a point on the far wall or out the window if you have such a good fortune to see that view. And then push your personal space out there, and then push your personal space out to the left and right and behind you and above you. And then invite one of your, we call them euphemistically a posse member, but one of your archetypes, and just take a few seconds and feel what it would be like to connect to that energy. Now, think of that event again. And as you think about it, notice if it's different at all, or your perception of the situation was different. Was it different for anyone? So the principle that we've been working with is that I coached us into a different energetic pattern, and it actually changed our perception. It's very difficult to change our mind with our mind. That has been my experience. I can try to tell myself, don't worry, it's okay. And that's because my body is still running that cortisol or that energy. If I can actually change the chemicals in my body, my brain changes. So the whole idea of uplifting, of opening, of expanding, and thinking of something that makes us smile puts us into a different energetic state and actually changes the chemicals. And my experience is it won't last. The point is not that it lasts. The point is that I've been able to shift temporarily, and then I'll react again, and then I'll shift again. And so you can do it quite easily. I took a longer time coaching us, but you can do a shorter version. You can just uplift, straighten up. You can look out and expand out, even extend your arms out a little bit. And then you can just soften and settle and think of something that makes you smile. Even that simple little exercise will start to shift your state, and it'll change your perception of the situation. When we get impacted, we get a voicemail, an email, somebody looks at us, our own inner critic comes up. There's that tightening again. And we can acknowledge it and say, yes, look, there it is. And then I can take another breath and I can inhale, lighten up, exhale, soften. As I think of something that makes me smile, expand out a little bit, and then settle. And also in this model, what's different than many other embodiment approaches is that we don't focus on getting grounded. I know that sounds like heresy, but it's not our thing. In Aikido, I don't focus on getting grounded either. And I'll explain to you why. If I get grounded, if I tell myself be grounded, I'll put my weight down. If I put my weight down, I become heavy. If I become heavy, the feeling that I start to communicate is heavy. And then the quality of our conversation will be heavy. We work quite a bit in organizations, tech and biotech in the Silicon Valley, and people have to have difficult conversations. Also on the Aikido mat, I have some guys in my school who are half my age and twice my size. And if I put my weight down, they'll put their weight down. And they're bigger and stronger than I am, then it's going to be harder. If I lighten up, if I open up the way, if you've ever taken a yoga class and you go to stand on one foot, you pick up the other foot, your system will send energy up to stabilize. The idea in leadership embodiment is that we want a balance, perfect balance, ideally, between centrifugal force, which goes upward, and gravitational force, which goes downward. So the Earth is spinning approximately 1,000 miles an hour. That would tend to fling things off of it. That's centrifugal force. We don't have to manufacture it. It's just there. We can just enjoy that upliftedness. And then there's gravity. If we have a nice balance, then we can be strong and light instead of being tough and stable and grounded and trying to grip the earth. So also in our conversations and when we're centering, we emphasize the uplift to create a sense of lightness and then a softening without gripping the ground. And two of my heroes, one is the Dalai Lama and the other is Desmond Tutu. I don't know, there's a wonderful book called The Book of Joy, which I recommend to everybody if you haven't read it. It's just lovely. It's them having conversations and teasing each other. Both of them do this very interesting thing when somebody asks them a question that's very heavy about suffering or torture or something like that. Both of them will give a little giggle. I don't know if you've ever seen them interviewed. And that's their way of making the situation light, and then they answer it. Because when people are more light and open, they're more receptive. When people are heavier and more grounded, they tend to be less receptive. There tend to be a sense of, I'm here, I know what's right, I'm going to do it. So I know this is very different than many embodiment practices, and I've found that it's made a huge difference in my life to use this sense of lightness as a place of power and stability. Instead of telling myself and telling everyone, get grounded, I actually give the instruction, uplift, lighten up, soften, open. And that's because we're not stabilizing on the ground, we're actually stabilizing on the space. What I talked about before, all those archetypes in the space, the idea is they support me. So I don't feel like I have to grip the ground for myself. I'm supported by the energy around me. And when I'm in that state, people tend to be more receptive to what I have to say than when I'm in this kind of, okay, I know what's right and I'm going to tell you and I've got a lot of experience. That's a bit of a heavier feeling. So So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to listen without taking it personally, and we'll do a little exercise with that. And then you can go into, maybe break out and go into some discussions if you like. So now that we've established that the space has resources and that it's not empty, but it's actually something we can use, because of the nature of the situation, I'll have us work with our own inner critic. You could certainly do this with a criticism someone has given you, or a criticism you think someone might give you. In this case, you could work with a criticism you've given yourself. So I'm going to demonstrate. And like we did in the first exercise, I'm going to tighten up. I'm going to go into my personality's embodied pattern, which is crossed and closed and a little bit low and heavy. And I'm going to say to myself, which is a criticism I give myself, Wendy, you've been working on this new book for 2 years. I don't see a lot of good progress. I think you're just procrastinating. And that's very typical of me. And then I feel as a little bit of guilt and shame and a little irritation, and it's very indicative. So first you'll all do that and then just notice it. To get the most from this exercise, it helps if you exaggerate a little bit. In other words, when I'm closing, I tighten a little more than I might normally. That'll just help trigger all of that part of my personality. Once I've noticed that, now I'm going to change up. Okay, let's do this. So everybody just do that. Everyone who's on the call, come up with a criticism you give yourself. Close and tighten, and then say that criticism to yourself. And just kind of, it should feel familiar, and you should, it's likely you might have some negative emotional reaction to yourself. Okay, let's stop, because I think we all got there pretty quickly. Most of us do anyway with self-criticism. Once again, let's go into a different state. So sit up straighter again. This time as you inhale up, try to imagine there's a little clouds between your vertebrae. So your vertebrae actually lengthen. And if you can try this, if you're watching, this is kind of fun. Touch the top of your head with your hand, and then pop your hand up like this, straight up above your head, and feel how your energy pops up and lightens up. Now as you exhale, soften and think of something that makes you smile. And do it one more time. Inhale, a little bit upliftedness in the spine, a lightness. And as you exhale, breathe down, soften, think of something that makes you smile. Once again, extend your personal space out. Look out the window or look to the corners of the room. And you could even take your arms, and reach them out a little bit. Just have a feeling of extending and opening. We're exaggerating a little, but it won't hurt to really expand yourself out. Nice. Now see if you can think of an archetype that you can imagine would handle criticism with a little more grace. I would often use Nelson Mandela. In my imagination, he's someone who would be graceful in the face of criticism. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's just, could be anything, could be a movie character or whatever. Okay, and now that you've done that, what I'd like you to do is look in front of you and find a spot either on the desk in front of you or in the room in front of you. And I'm going to have you say the words to yourself and put them out there in that spot and look at them. So I'm going to say the words to myself about my book. I'm going to say, Wendy, you've been working on this for 2 years. I don't think that you're making much progress. I think you're procrastinating. And then I'm going to put those words out there. I'm going to look at them. So they're at a distance now, and I'm in a different state. And as I look at them, I have, for myself, quite a different reaction to it. I think, yeah, that's right. I have been taking a lot of time. And actually, I'm going to use this moment where my inner critic gave to me to give me a little bit more of a boost to, let's see if you can put a little more time in and find time during the day to spend some time doing it. So I had a very different reaction to my own inner critic when I was in this different state of being. If you can just discuss a little bit the difference between experiencing your own inner critic and what it was like to talk to yourself when you were in a tighter, more constricted state, and what it was like to hear that criticism, not only when you were more open, but you actually looked at the words at a distance from yourself. It's a little bit like if you ever had a friend who they were going through a relationship and it wasn't doing well and they couldn't see it, but you could. The reason you can see it is because you have distance. I have a friend who's going to make a coaching t-shirt. He said he's going to make a t-shirt that says, I can help you with your problem because it's not mine, which I thought was very cute. So that's what we're trying to do in this, is get some distance from ourselves and look at what we said. And maybe we have a little bit more insight or view on our inner critic instead of being so negative about it. The tip is, let's do it. So before I leave you, let's just uplift a little bit more as we inhale. And then let's soften and think of something that makes us smile, just to feel that. And then just let yourself radiate out, whether you want to stretch out your arms or not, just feel yourself expand and radiate out. And then invite inspiration to come through you. Open yourself to wisdom, compassion, confidence, courage, because it's there. And if we open ourselves, it comes through. So I thank all of you, and I hope you have many noble, awesome, and shiny moments going forward, and that we can support our clients and everybody that we touch in the world to be more embodied, more whole, and to live more into their potential.
That's beautiful.